So welcome, Brian. We're really looking forward to today's session and to Centrify's insights on how we can chart a course forward.
Thanks, Christine. Let me share my screen here. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Fantastic. You made me nervous for a second there.
We can see your screen just
all right.
fine as well.
There we go. Perfect. So as Christine mentioned, my name is Brian Carmen. I'm from Centrify. I am a senior solutions engineer. I've been with the company for about a little over 4 years. For those that aren't familiar with Centrify, we are in the privileged access management space. That encompasses a lot of things. We're going to be focusing on, obviously, primarily secure remote access in this case for our administrators. Now, just to make things clear, we're not talking about removing VPN for folks like your sales team or your administrative assistants for getting onto the network. Centrify is essentially 100% concerned with our knowledge workers, right? Our IT staff, developers, admins, and such, being able to have access to the systems and resources that they need to access with the right amount of authority to do so. So as we're being obviously bombarded with everything going on in the world these days, these are principles that should already be applied anyway, but they're becoming more and more evident that they're not being applied as well as they should be as we've been forced into this current way of working and doing business. We need to allow access to the required resources, not to the entire network. We need to ensure a higher level of certainty that it truly is the authorized administrator that's taking the actions on those resources. Christine mentioned the phishing. That's obviously a huge thing. It always has been. Hackers, and the term hackers, I use it broadly. They're not really hacking in a lot of cases. They're getting you to tell them your password, and then they're using that to get in. That's not really what I would call hacking, right? They're not cracking your password. You're freely giving it to them, and it happens constantly. Those phishing emails that we all get that seem silly, and we go, well, who would fall for that? Well, if people weren't falling for them, they wouldn't keep coming, right? The criminal enterprise is a business, just like yours and mine is. They're going to do the things that work, and it does work. So we want to make sure that these folks really are who they say they are when they're coming in. We want to be able to manage the resources that these users are connecting to, no matter where they reside, whether they're on-prem in a colo, in AWS or Azure or GCP, wherever they happen to reside, without the user needing knowledge of the network configuration to be able to access them. Right? We need to enable security and usability at the same time. And most importantly, we need to provide granular privilege, not just to things like the local admin or the root account. Right? It's a rare case when full administrative access is required. Instead, give users just the amount of access they need in a just-in-time fashion. If I don't need to be able to perform a certain function, I shouldn't be able to. But there might be the times when I do. I can request it on a temporary basis, have it for that just-in-time, just enough access, and have it removed when the time comes. I'm going to go through a handful of slides. I'm not going to try not to bore you too much with them, but they do kind of paint the picture of what we're going to be talking about, and then I'll give you a quick demo of the things that we're going to talk about. Okay. So VPNs, we've all been using them for a long time. They are better than nothing. There's no doubt about that. We're using our VPNs to connect into data centers. That often means that we're requiring a lot of other things to be in place. First off, client software that needs to be on the end user's machine in the first place. We need to be able to trust that that endpoint is not infected. That's a really, really tall order. To put it in perspective, anecdotally speaking, I live in Florida. I'm from Baltimore. I go home to visit the folks over the holidays. This past year, I didn't take my laptop. I said, I'm not working. Well, we all know how that goes. I ended up having to work. And my options really were go out and buy a laptop or use the same desktop PC that my folks have had since I was in high school, and I'm 43 years old. The problem there is I don't know what's on that box. I opened up a browser, and it had more toolbars on it than browser screen, right? So do I really want that connecting to my internal network? As the bad guys are compromising these machines, whether it's through ransomware or malware or compromised credentials, whatever the case may be, as we're expanding this, our footprint and where our systems reside even. We're opening up more and more VPNs. VPN means you're on the network as well, right? If I've got bad juju on my laptop and I connect to your network, there's a chance that that could spread because I'm on the network. Now we can do things like network segmentation, and we can enforce that you have to have virus definitions updated. I think we all know that antivirus is it's a necessary evil. It is going to help to eliminate some things, but it's most certainly is not the be-all and end-all of making sure that our machines are secure. From Centrify's perspective, we're enforcing a zero trust methodology. Now, zero trust, I know, was kind of the marketing buzzword for the past couple of years, but the fact is it's a principle that we've been applying since before that term even came to be coined by Forrester. What we're doing is really following a loop of processes, right? We want to establish trust. We want to make sure that the user is who they say they are. We want to know what it is that they need to access and why. We want to do so from a secure environment, and we want to make sure that they don't have too much privilege than they need to. And we want to make sure that we're recording those things, right? That we know what they're doing when they are accessing those systems, and then adapt our controls in response to that, right? If we see something that's out of the norm, why? Why did that happen? Is it becoming the new norm? Are there changes that we need to make in our controls, whether to loosen or tighten in varying degrees? And it really is a circle, right? But the whole idea being, we want to make sure that, again, we're limiting our exposure. So the couple that we're going to focus on primarily today is a secure administrative environment. Now, when you're accessing privileged resources, it's critical that we don't introduce infections to our connection. And to achieve this, we need to make sure that access is only achieved through a clean source. To achieve this, zero trust privilege means preventing direct access from user workstations, right? Like my dad's computer that's got all kinds of garbage on it. Preventing that direct access via the internet, whether it's over the internet or via email. Those machines are exposed constantly, right? Through email, through a number of other mechanisms. They're too easily infected with malware. So the access should only be achieved through approved privileged administrative consoles. And that can include web-based access to sensitive systems, via a lockdown and clean server gateway. That's going to serve as a kind of a local jump box. And a properly designed system will allow administrators to access machines through the client of their choice, whether it's a browser or native clients on their desktop, or fat clients like Toad or Toad or SQL management, SQL management server, the SAP SAP GUI, for example. Whatever thick clients or thin that they happen to use on a regular basis, we want to facilitate that, but to do so in a secure fashion. Now, those distributed jump hosts or server gateways, they serve a dual purpose for load balancing in the same network and for supporting multiple different private networks. The connectors go where the resources are located, as I mentioned, whether that's in a DMZ, in an infrastructure as a service model, whether it's AWS or Azure or GCP or Alibaba, completely vendor agnostic, or in a virtual private network. And the beauty of a properly designed zero trust privileged admin environment is that it must not only allow remote staff to access the resources 24/7, but it also needs to be configured and utilized for outsourced IT, outsourced development, right? Because that alleviates the need for a VPN for those folks. Give them surgical access to what they need and have transport security between the secure client and the distributed connectors. We'll touch on all that as we go through. So verifying who? How do we do that? One of the core tenets of identity management and privilege management being a part of that is consolidation of identities, right? So utilizing your existing directories, whether that's Active Directory, as it is for most folks, or LDAPs, Google Directory Services, whatever the case may be, or multiples of any of those. But the idea being removing local accounts from systems as much as possible, right? Making sure that we're following the red trust model for having those alternate accounts, those admin accounts, right? I've got a regular user account. I've got an administrative account. Now, the problem with those administrative accounts, I've been before I joined the dark side and went to work for a vendor, I was an actual real security person once upon a time. I had those admin accounts back then, and I was guilty of this. I'm sure nobody on this call was, though. You're on mute, so I'm not going to ask you if you have done this or not, but we all log in with those accounts to be more efficient instead of switching back and forth. That defeats the purpose of those things, right? So instead, we want to secure those accounts, make sure that the proper owner is assigned to those accounts, so that me, brian.carmen@centrify.com. I have brian.carmen-a at centrify.com. I own that account. I'm the only one who can access that account, but I don't know the password for it, right? But I can utilize it in my job functions. Providing multi-factor authentication when doing so, whether that's when checking out that account, when accessing the privileged access service, as I'm going to show you shortly, when checking out an account, or when elevating privilege. Right? So it's not just about gaining access to the system, but it's what can I do once I'm on there, and again, constantly verifying that the user is who they say they are. Contextualizing the request, right? We need to know why somebody or something is performing a privileged activity. We need to understand the context behind that request for access, as well as review and approve that request based on that context. Right? This is the concept of just-in-time privilege and just-in-time access. The who's, what's, why's, where's, when's, and how's, right? I need access to this system and I need to be a full local admin on it. Well, why? For how long? Do you have a trouble ticket? Are you applying patches? Is there a change record? Let's have all of those things documented, have it approved by an approver or a set of approvers, whether that's through our own console or integrations with ITSMs like ServiceNow or IGAs like SailPoint, and then an approver or set of approvers to facilitate that, and having constant review of those actions as they're taken. So as shown in this diagram, the Zero Trust privilege leverages centralization, simplicity, and scalability as an architectural guiding factor. So in this case, going back and taking out that VPN, in this case, my user, coming from their laptop, no matter what that laptop happens to be, whether it's a company-issued laptop or their own personal device or their dad's 25-year-old machine that's sitting in Baltimore, they're being prompted for multi-factor authentication via a web portal. Right? From there, we have what we call the connector. Right? The Centrify connector, we're very original in our naming conventions. It connects things. What it does, it calls outbound of report 443 to the privileged access service, to the product that we're going to be showing in a moment. That means there's no inbound traffic. Right? It calls outbound and it establishes a mutually authenticated persistent tunnel. Once that tunnel's initiated, bidirectional traffic is possible over the tunnel. But what that means is you're not punching holes inbound into your network. That connector is talking to Active Directory. As you'll see in a moment, I'm going to log in to the portal using my Active Directory credentials. We're not replicating AD into the cloud service, though. Right? What we're doing is a real-time authentication over that tunnel. Okay? The connector is going to facilitate my SSH connection to my Linux servers, or my RDP connection to my Windows servers. Right? Now, it's going to present it to me as a web emulation. That means I'm not actually talking directly to that box. My machine that's sitting up in the top there is not actually on the same network. So if there is anything on my box, it's not actually able to traverse. Right? So far, and I always say so far because the bad guys are smart. There's a lot of money in being a bad guy. The bad guys are smart. So far, they haven't figured out a way to be able to get malware through a web browser going backwards towards the server and then through and on to the final destination. We know they can go the other direction, right? We know that web servers can serve up malware to our browsers, but this is the reverse. This is going from browser into the web server, which is the connector, and then from there over the SSH or RDP connection to our target systems. And again, making sure we have multi-factor authentication involved every step of the way to facilitate additional infrastructure. It's a hub and spoke model. The privileged access service, it says here it's cloud hosted. That is our main method of deployment. We do allow you to deploy it in your own infrastructure as well. It's the exact same software. It's just a matter of SaaS versus on-prem, right? Just like you can think about Office 365 and Exchange. Functionality, it's the exact same, right? I can still open my email. I still can get my calendar, my reminders, my tasks, all of that stuff, my directory. But from an administrative perspective, I don't have to worry about updates. I don't have to worry about high availability and disaster recovery and all of that fun stuff. Whatever the case may be, wherever your privileged access service is deployed, the connectors act as spokes to that hub. So you drop a connector into each of your different environments. They call home over port 443 to your service. They establish those tunnels to each of those environments. What that does is enables your user, whether they're sitting outside of the network, whether they're sitting inside your four walls once things get hopefully back to a better sense of normal for all of us, to be able to access the systems that they need access to. Those connectors can be dropped into other environments where you might have other directory services as well. When that happens, you're able to join those directory services into the privileged access service too. So that users, if you make an acquisition, for example, merging Active Directories can be a time-consuming process, to put it mildly, but we still need to have business go on. We still have departments that are merging that need to be able to fulfill their duties. Being able to drop a connector into those different environments facilitates that as well. It's a multi-directory brokering service as well as everything else that we've mentioned. And this is just another illustration of how that works, right? Just dropping in connectors into these different environments no matter where they happen to be. From a multi-factor authentication standpoint, again, it's all about making sure that the person is who they say they are as they're connecting in. We have a number of different ways to do so. We have contextual-based multi-factor authentication to make things a little bit smoother for the end user. We have different rules applied depending on the use case. Are you inside the network? Do you have a trusted device, meaning you've got a machine that's been issued by the organization? We know this because there's a PKI certificate that's been installed on the box that we were able to recognize. Are you coming in during your normal business hours? Are they outside of the scope? Have you logged in from Atlanta 2 hours ago and right now you're logging in from Boise? Probably unlikely, right? Travel velocity coming into play there as well. These are things where we can say, okay, let's multi-factor where we might not have before, or let's deny access where we might have allowed it in the past. And then having flexible factors for freedom, right? So I'm going to show you two different examples of multi-factor as I'm going through this process. We have an app that's freely available in the Play Store and in the Google Play Store and the Apple iTunes App Store. But you likely have your own MFA already today. We don't charge extra for the MFA. It's included as part of the product. The engine's there. If you have an existing MFA, we can integrate with it. That's the idea. From a user perspective, and that's usually one of my greatest concerns, right? I will never tell a customer that setting something up is an easy thing to do, but what I want to do is make it as easy for the end user as possible because that makes the administrator's life that much easier. We don't want to have a virtual version of that janitor's keyring full of RSA hard tokens that we all used to have to carry around with a different token for every single thing that we do. I don't want that on my phone. I don't want an Okta MFA and a Centrify MFA and a Ping MFA and a Duo MFA. One app to rule them all is the idea. But we can also incorporate authentication with things like smart cards and derived credentials for PKI-based authentication and FIDO devices, things like a YubiKey. Last slide, I promise, and then we're going to get into showing you a bit of this. The Centrify identity-centric PAM platform. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it really is a platform. There are 5 pillars, 4 main pillars to the platform. What we're going to be focusing on primarily, initially, is the privileged access service on the far left. That is really the basis of the platform. You see the platform down at the bottom, but they are almost one and the same. What that's going to do is facilitate my connectivity. It's going to facilitate my multi-factor authentication. It's also a vault, right? So when a lot of people think about PAM, they think vault. Vaulting is a very important part of privilege management. It's a small part of privilege management, right? I mentioned we want to have identity consolidation, have users log in as themselves. It's for accountability and non-repudiation, but also for the least privilege, which we get with the privilege elevation services I'll show you. I think about it from the perspective of a traditional physical vault, right? 4 steel walls that are made of and plus a ceiling and a floor, right? So six steel walls that are a foot thick with gold bricks inside of them. You're not taking out a gold brick to go to Starbucks to buy a cup of coffee. That's kind of the equivalent of checking out the root password to restart the Apache service. Instead, give our web admins the ability to do that without having too much privilege. But we still need to vault those accounts. Right? They still need to be controlled. They still need to be rotated on a regular basis. Occasionally, they will need to be accessed in a break glass scenario, ideally. That's a big part of privilege, but it's not all of it. The authentication service we utilize from a multi-directory brokering standpoint. That's where I was talking about having multiple Active Directories, or having LDAPs, End Active Directory, and federated directory services. But it also includes Active Directory bridging for our Unix and Linux systems that traditionally are not able to join Active Directory. Windows obviously is natively able to do so, but in some cases, AD might not be present. That's where our brokering system comes into play as well, where we can join Windows, Unix, and Linux into your directory services whether or not Active Directory is present. When Active Directory is there, though, that gives us a bit more capability, particularly around the Unix and Linux side, where we can start pushing group policy to those systems, where we can enforce multi-factor authentication at system login, not just at the vault level, but at the system, and also when we elevate our privilege with the privilege elevation service, which is essentially, you can kind of think of it like sudoers inside of Active Directory. It's centralized sudoers who can do what? It's all role-based, right? Instead of having multiple sudoers files throughout your environment, having it all in one place, having it all consolidated so that's easily reportable, and it's all role-based. A new user comes on board, new web admin. They get added to the web admins group. They get the ability to log into web servers, but not into database servers. They get the ability to rotate the Apache logs and start and stop the Apache service and edit the Apache config file, but they can't do anything else with privilege. As soon as they change jobs or get disabled in AD, their rights either change or go away, respective. And then the audit and monitoring service, which is privileged session recording. Essentially, I've got a GoPro on my forehead. It's recording everything that I'm doing while I'm in these systems. Right? Now, we do that in two different ways. We do it at the gateway level, at that connector I was describing. We also do it at the agent level for host-based auditing. That gives you greater fidelity and greater assurance that users are really who they say they are, that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And it also ties in at that point with the privilege elevation service, where if a user has somehow disabled the audit and monitoring service, we can prevent them from elevating their privilege. Right? This slide, I'm not a big fan typically of marketing slides, but I like this one a lot because of the puzzle piece look to it. There's a bit of a 1 + 1 = 3. When you have the privileged access service incorporated with the authentication service, you get multi-factor authentication at login. When it's incorporated with the privilege elevation service, you get multi-factor authentication and privilege elevation. You also get workflow to have just-in-time access to a role. And then with the audit and monitoring service tied in as well, we can again control that a user cannot elevate privilege if that's been disabled. What we also do is prevent the circumvention. If you're only recording at a gateway, which most PAM providers do, you're not able to record if someone goes directly to that target system as opposed to going through the gateway. All right. That's it for slides. Let's go ahead and take a look at what it actually looks like. So the privileged access service, as I mentioned, got a web front end. I'm going to log in using my Active Directory credentials. And we'll see I'm going to be prompted for multi-factor authentication right off the bat. Now, I mentioned we have a number of different means for doing so. I have them all available to me, or most of them available to me, because I demonstrate a lot of these things. In this case, I'm going to use my on-device authenticator. It's the fingerprint reader on my laptop, so we've got some biometric incorporation there, validating that it's really me, and then prompting me for my Active Directory password, which I hope I typed correctly. There we go. Now, once I'm logged in here, we see in this environment, I'm an administrator of Centrify. So I've got a lot more available to me on the left side than most of my users would. Most of my users are going to spend their time in the workspace. Now, what we want to take a look at in this case is remote access. So we see here I'm not on the VPN. That's not connected. That's what I wanted to make sure of. I'm not connected to the VPN. But I've got a Linux system here that I need to connect to. I have a number of different methods to be able to do so. I can request a vaulted account, right? In that case, this might be the root account, right? With the root account, we see there's a lock there. That means I can see that it exists, but I can't log into it without workflow. That's that just-in-time access, right? But I could log in with the Centrify account that we've created on here, a local account. What this is going to do is give me the ability to launch this connection. The connector is launching the SSH session, and it's going to present it to me as a web emulation without exposing the password to me. That's the key piece there, right? So when we're talking about vaulting, we want to make sure that if we are using a local account, we want to protect the password as much as possible. We want to rotate it anytime it's used, anytime it's exposed, but if we can protect it from ever being exposed in the first place, all the better. Now, more importantly though, is that idea of our identity consolidation. So in this case, what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to say use my account. What this is going to do, it's going to log me in with my Active Directory credential to this Linux box. Okay. When it does so, what's actually happening, it's passing a very short-lived SSH certificate, right, as opposed to an SSH key. SSH keys are very convenient, but they're convenient for the bad guys too. Again, this goes to that whole, can I trust that endpoint? Right? If that endpoint's been compromised and you've got a bunch of SSH keys sitting on it, they've got your SSH keys. Right? In this case, we're using very short-lived SSH certificates to log me in. So as soon as I use it, it dies. It's very ephemeral. But now that I'm logged in here, if I look for myself in the local users file, the Etsy password file, I'm not there. Right? Just like my Windows machine. Right? I log into my Windows laptop, for example. I don't have a local account on that box, but the machine knows who I am. I've got a home folder, a user folder in Windows, a home directory within the Linux space that has my files in it, has my settings in it. I've got a shell, I've got a UID. All of this needs to be present to enable this to happen. But then what can I do once I'm on this box? Now in this box I happen to be a standard user. I can't really do anything as myself. However, I can request the ability to do so. This is that just-in-time, just-enough access, right? Again, not on the network, right? I'm remote. I'm sitting in Florida. This machine's sitting in Santa Clara, California. I'm not on the VPN. These are really the key concepts here. It doesn't matter about my laptop. I mean, it matters to me. I don't want any junk on there, but it doesn't matter from the endpoint perspective about my machine, because I'm not actually going to be on the network. I'm not actually going to be on that box. In this case, I have the ability to request two different roles here. These are roles that are configured. You can kind of think of these almost like sudoers roles, right? So in this case, I'm going to request the ability to read the protected logs file. Now, when I submit that request, I can say, in this case, I'm going to say I'm doing it because it's a demo. And I can request it on a temporary or permanent or a windowed basis. Windowed would be, I need to do this in advance, right? I'm setting this up. It's Patch Tuesday. I need to request this. It's going to be 3 o'clock in the morning when I'm working. My boss isn't going to be awake then, doesn't want to get a phone call or a text message asking him to approve it. I can request it in advance. In this case, I'm going to say, I just need temporary access. I need it for the next 15 minutes. I can tie this to a ticket. If you have an ITSM, like I mentioned, like a ServiceNow, it can be incorporated in there, or a Remedy or any of those guys. We've built a lot of the pre-configured capabilities to be able to do so that your users just go to one place to be able to do this, and then it's tied to your change control. But when I submit this, it's going to go to a set of approvers. Right? Now I'm watching and making sure on my other screen that as that happens, I'm going to be made aware of it. And there we go. One of my buddies approved it for me. So now I can right-click on that box, and now I can log back in as myself. And I will have some extended capabilities. So if I say DZ Info is going to show me what rights I have. This is the right that was just granted to me. The ability to read logs within the Vim var directory. It's a protected directory. Can't do that unless you're a local admin or have been given sudoer rights to be able to do so. So if I were to try without, I'm going to get permission denied. Now what that usually means is that we would sudo. Now we have a substitute for sudo. We call it dzdo. As I mentioned, when you join these systems, the Active Directory, you can push group policies. You can push a symlink so your users can still type sudo. They don't have to learn new muscle memory. But if I say dzdo and I do the same thing, here's where I can be prompted for multi-factor authentication at privilege elevation. Right? This is pretty key because I want to be able to continue to validate that my user is who they say they are, especially if they're performing a critical function. Now, you don't have to apply this at every single privilege elevation, right? That would drive your end users nuts. You can get very granular when you're doing this. Starting and stopping the Apache service, fairly trivial. Editing the HTTP config file where you can really do some damage, prompt for multi-factor authentication there. Now what I've done, I just sent a message to my smartphone here, and we see on my Centrify app, my login request has been received to elevate my privilege, and at this point I can now execute that command. Oops. Get out of there. Now, the same thing for Windows, right? I need to connect to a Windows box securely and remotely. In this case, I'm going to log in. I'm going to enter my account. We prompted for multi-factor authentication here. Now, we can prompt at a couple of different places. In this case, I'm prompting at the web level, right, using my on-device authenticator again. There we go. And what's happening here? The connector is launching my RDP session. It's presenting it to me as a web emulation, right? Same concept as with that Linux system, right? But in this case, I'm not on the box. Again, this is really key to the idea of secure remote access for administrators. These are critical business systems. We want to make sure that they're protected. We want to remove that direct connectivity from my end user's machine to these boxes by having that secure jump host, if you will, to be able to control what I'm doing. From the perspective of being able to elevate privilege within Windows as well, very similarly to what we do in the Linux space, we can do very granular privilege management within Windows. So if I were to, oh no, we don't want that. We'll go to a different box. I don't want to go through. Don't want to go through Windows updates. Log in here again. Now, you may have noticed that I was not prompted for multi-factor there. You can set a pass-through time so that if you've been authenticated, within 5 minutes, for example, you don't have to re-authenticate, and that's configurable via policy. Now we'll see when we're logged in here. The hamsters keep rolling in that wheel. Come on. Once we're in here, we're going to demonstrate the privilege elevation within Windows. Now, in this box, it's a pretty standard box, not a whole lot installed on it, but with Windows, natively, any Active Directory user can log into any Windows machine other than domain controllers. Now, with the privilege elevation service, we're able to actually say who can log into what box first and foremost. So when I log in, there's an agent that's deployed on these systems, whether it's Unix, Linux, or Windows. It's making that standard Active Directory LDAP call, validating my credentials. Then it's checking, hey, are you authorized to even log into this box? If you are, you're required to multi-factor. And if you are allowed in and you've multi-factored, what rights do you have on this box once you're there? Right? It caches that, so it's not having to make these calls constantly. But what this does is it says, I'm able to log into this box, and everybody can launch pretty much every application within Windows. But what can you do once you're in there? Easy example is Event Viewer. Right? Everybody can launch Event Viewer. Everybody on this call, I'm sure, has launched Event Viewer. If you're not a local admin on the box, or a member of the log viewers role, I believe is the name of the built-in role or built-in group, you're not able to see the security tab. You get a big red X. It says you're not allowed. Right? Now, just like my DZ-do role in the Linux side, I've got a role in here that enables me to elevate my privilege within this application. We call it run with privilege. Very similar to run as administrator, run as another user, but I don't need to know that other user's password. I don't even need to know that other user exists. And I can be prompted for multi-factor authentication here as well. We'll use the mobile authenticator again. I get the push notification to my phone and approve it. You guys don't need to see that again. You just saw it. And at this point, when it launches the application, now if I go to my security logs, we'll see them being populated, right? 30,000 or so in there. what this does, it actually also limits it to just this window, right? It's not just across the board, I've elevated my privilege, I can open again. So if I open up another event viewer window here, and I go to my Windows logs, in this one, still can't do it, right? In this one, I've got it. The idea being here, if I were actually logging in as local administrator, or if I were in the local administrators group, everything that I do is as a local admin. That means mistakes that I make are as a full-blown local admin as well. Okay. So it's a matter of controlling access to the systems, but then controlling what our users can do once they have that access. Now, it's not just about access to systems. Obviously, that's what most folks think about, is access to servers. But we've got our network devices as well, right? Similarly, if I came in here and I said, let's request an account on the Cisco box. Log in as this guy. It's doing the exact same thing, right? An SSH session prompted with multi-factor authentication. And there we go. And now once I'm logged in, if I were to run a command, let's say show con, right? I'm able to actually do what I need to do to perform my job function at this point. And when I'm finished, I can log out. Now, I talked about being able to control access into the systems, making sure that it's a secure channel to be able to do so, being able to limit what our users can do once they're in those systems. But then we also want to be able to know what those users have done. Right? That's really important. So in that case, we're going to go ahead and take a look. Everything that I've just been doing has been being recorded. So jumping in here, we shall see today's sessions. Right? So if I look at my queries here, I can actually run a query real quick, and we'll see anytime that show con command was run today. So this is today's, this is that session I just did. Right? We're able to replay that. We'll see that I ran the command. It's recording it just as though, like I said, as I have a GoPro on my forehead. Now, in the case of Unix and Linux and Unix-based systems, such as the Cisco box, it's recording on the left-hand side the metadata of the commands that I typed. Right? So if I looked again at today, and I see for myself here, say this guy, this Linux session, this is where I logged in and I checked to make sure that I wasn't a local account on this machine. Right? So we're able to see everything that I did. In the case of Windows, it's very similar. The Windows session I just ran was very short, and I've got another one I can show you here that shows a little bit more detail. When we replay this one, and Windows, obviously, because it's GUI-based, it's graphical, we're not capturing keystrokes like we are in the Linux and Unix space. What we're doing is actually capturing what application and the title of the window that was opened at the time. But we also see we can jump to that portion of the recording and replay from that. Right? So we have sessions that might be 8 to 10 hours long in a full working day. We don't need to sit through all of that. We can actually search through and find what it is that we're looking for. And the idea here is that it all ties back in to that loop that we discussed of establishing the trust, right? Verifying who I am, contextualizing my request, right? Why do I need to be able to do this? Doing so from a secure environment, and granting least privilege while I'm doing so, then auditing what it is that I've done. I've seen a couple of things popping up, flashing at me on the side, so I have a feeling that means there's been a couple of questions in the chat. Obviously, we've done this from a pretty high level, didn't go too deep in the weeds. I'm very happy to answer some questions, though, if Christine, if you want to kind of fire away.
Yes, thank you for that. And thanks for the demo, Brian. That was very interesting. So one of the questions that we have, and I'll just encourage anyone who has a question, please just raise your hand or type a message to us, and I'll pass your question along to Brian. But one of the questions is, does PaaS come as a cloud or an on-prem offering? And if it's a cloud SaaS offering, then how does that get pointed to any on-prem resources?
Yeah. So it actually is available as both, right? And as I described, if we look at the, actually I've got another diagram I can throw up on the screen real quick that should help to illustrate this. Let's see, somewhere here. We'll just show this one again. Same one. Makes it a little bit easier. Sorry, I did it right there. The service can be deployed as a cloud service, right? As I mentioned, where we host it for you. We're handling the high availability, the elasticity, the disaster recovery, all that fun stuff that nobody really wants to deal with. Or you can deploy it on your own infrastructure. We basically give you the same code that we deploy in our cloud service. And obviously, we're very happy to help you install that in your own environment, but it would require you to have the infrastructure on which for it to run and the staff to manage it from a, the same perspective that you would with any other on-prem enterprise solution. The way that it connects is through those connectors, as I described. The connectors get installed wherever your users and or systems happen to reside. They phone home. Right? There's no calling from the service into your environment. It's the other way around. You call outbound to your service. I apologize for the squeaky chair. I need to oil it. I don't know if you can hear that on the phone.
So here's another question. What are your thoughts on MFA plus SSO, but also having just-in-time elevated privileges for specific services?
Absolutely, all of the above. so we actually incorporate with all of the SSO providers that are out there, right? Because this is a web-based application, essentially, we can be the service provider to your identity provider. That enables you to have that single sign-on into the platform itself. Provide MFA while you're doing so, right? If you're using, say, Okta or Azure AD, ADFS, or Ping Federate or CA SiteMinder, whatever you happen to be using, all of those have their own built-in MFA with them. We can be just another one of those app tiles that are in that platform that you're accessing. You provide MFA to get access in here, right? Then from there, everything that I just showed you takes over just the same, right? Where we've got that just-in-time access to be able to request via workflow. We've got the ability to have multi-factor authentication at password checkout, at system login, at privilege elevation. Again, utilizing either the methods that we provide for you for MFA or tying back into that that IDP, that SSO provider's multi-factor authentication as well.
So we have a couple more questions coming in, but while I'm just going to take a quick pause and launch a poll question asking our attendees what percentage of their workforce is currently working remotely. Just kind of curious to see where people are at right now as things start to slowly open back up. And then while everybody's answering that, I've got another question for you, Brian. How do you ensure that your remote access is valid and that it hasn't been hijacked for replay to injection, or is this out of scope for what we're talking about today?
Sure. So the SSL tunnel, the TLS tunnel that's initiated is actually helping to alleviate that concern, right? There is a PKI that's involved from at each level of the authentication to validate that the user is still, that the session hasn't been hijacked. In fact, we prevent you from a preventive measure to the dismay of some folks, but once they realize why, we don't allow deep packet inspection. Even if you're going through a proxy, right? If you're using a Blue Coat proxy, for example, or Palo Alto or whatever you happen to be using, we don't allow SSL termination of the certificate because that essentially is a man-in-the-middle attack from our point of view. It's secured from end to end via TLS and PKI.
Okay, I think we've got one last.
Multi-factor authentication over and over and over again, right? Constantly validating that the user is who they say they are. That's the idea of zero trust, right? It sounds a little harsh saying we don't trust our users, but the fact is we can't trust that it really is our users, right? That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. So last question, and then I think we will wrap up for the day. Do you subject your service to external auditing? Does it conform to specific security standards? And if so, is Centrify certified through a third party?
Absolutely. We are SOC 2 certified as well as FedRAMP. We were the first PAM as a service, and for a while we're the only ones. We were the first and still the only PAM as a service to have FedRAMP certification. For those not familiar with FedRAMP, that is saying that federal agencies are authorized to utilize our cloud service, as well as those who do business with those federal agencies. It's essentially SOC 2 on steroids. It's about twice as many requirements that you have to meet, and you're constantly revalidated, much more often than with SOC 2, for example. In addition to that, we're constantly doing black box and white box penetration tests, as well as vulnerability assessments.
Thank you so much for sharing both the demo and Centrify's thoughts on secure remote access today with all of us, Brian. For our attendees, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. Please keep your eyes out for a follow-up email this afternoon. We'll have a link to the full presentation. I know a few of you had trouble getting in at the beginning, and we're just dialed in via the phone. So that replay link will give you full access to the entire session, as well as a quick poll that we would like you to fill out that will tell us who your preferred vendor is so that we can get the promised lunch gift cards off to all of you. So thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Centrify, for coming and giving us this presentation today.
Well, thank you for setting it up, Christine. We really appreciate it.
Have a fantastic
Thank you so much, Christine. Everyone take care.
Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much.